I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that should be setting the internet on fire, but isn't, is why is the West abandoning Ukraine? I have operator Starsky here with me to discuss this subject, and if it throws you into blind rage because you are not and your country isn't, then listen to this, because we don't mean that people are not necessarily supporting us or countries are not supporting us. We mean it on a more global scale. Listen to it. Here we have operator Starsky. I feel like he is my next guest, does not need an introduction at this point. I'm going to steal the name of a Netflix show, but it is what it is. Also, today we're going to talk about some very important topics. I feel like we're going to bounce back and forth a little bit between a couple of them. And one of them is A, Russia trying to portray it as if they're winning the war. B, obviously causing ruckus in Europe. And C, is that this ruckus is showing fruits of its labor, because we are seeing a lot of commentary from foreign partners that Ukraine is doing this wrong or that wrong. We're seeing blame on Ukraine where blame is not really due. We're not blameless, and and no one is, but there is blame being attributed to us that's not reasonable. And also, well, there are a lot of political dynamics happening in the Western world that are just unacceptable in the situation in which we are right now. So I'll have you pick the first subject because we probably have like 12 today.
I would like to pick a very important subject regarding the morale globally, because what we see now is we see a lot of conflicts between, for example, Ukraine that loses its men on a daily basis, literally because those men don't have enough weaponry that was promised. And on the other side of this, we can see a lot of citizens that can probably feel a bit demoralized with the fact that they keep helping, they keep supporting Ukraine with their supplies, with their humanitarian aid and military aid, drones, etc., etc. But at the same time, we can see that Russians are creating this informational environment in which people feel extremely demoralized, because Russians are doing everything they can to show that they constantly win in this war. Let's take a look at the speed of movement of the Russian troops. For example, in March 2022, they would take 1,200 square kilometers on a daily basis. In September 2024, it was roughly 14 kilometers a day, considering enormous Russian losses. They're losing 1,600 men on a daily basis in the war of attrition, which is something people should also understand. In the war of attrition, and this is the phase of the war that we can see right now, only the country that manages to collect, to gather and preserve more resources than the other side wins the war. And for example, this is something we can see in Ukraine, where Ukraine already entered the phase where it can export the drones to other countries, while Russia only collects resources from other countries. They don't have enough military industry to produce enough vehicles for their army. Again, they can theoretically mobilize a lot of people, but at the same time, if they don't have enough vehicles to support their armies, it's pointless. If 2 million Russians come marching to Ukraine, it will be the happiest day for the Ukrainian artilleryman. I think it's obvious. And the problem here is that we have this internal conflict between the partners that is rising. We must understand one thing. Ukrainians lost a lot of men due to the Western hesitation. Unfortunately, the conflicts between the internal conflicts in the countries of our partners, where people still can't decide whether Russians are good or bad, whether Russians striking Ukrainian cities are war criminals or not. But on the other hand, we must understand that this is something that benefits Russia. Those conflicts is something that Russians are applauding to every single day when they see it in the social media. Therefore, my biggest advice is to preserve good communication, to be honest to each other, and to accept the fact that the hesitation leads to Ukrainian victims, to victims among Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians. That is something not really, not much of foreign politicians and foreign decision makers really understand, and that is something I would say citizens must understand as well, because this hesitation leads to Ukrainian soldiers dying, unable to shoot back, unable to utilize enough artillery shells, unable to utilize enough vehicles.
It kills
And
morale, right? It kills morale
yeah,
too. Like, for instance, right now, I want to piggyback off what you were saying, actually, 3 points before I forget, because ADHD is one being, it's about the framing, like Russian, like the amount of land that Russia takes, right? There was an article in the in the Times that I wanted to, that kind of, that feeds into our discussion, with Lloyd Austin saying that Ukrainians are doing warfare wrong because we now have a lot enough resources, and the problem is not resources. We have artillery shells, we have this, we have that, right? But we don't have enough men, and we're not mobilizing enough men. In that same article, he said that Russia has taken a record amount of territory in the past month, right? In 2024, which is funny because that record amount of territory is this much territory. And yes, it's record in in the whole year of 2024, but in the grand scheme of events, they barely took anything. And it's about the framing. But when Lloyd Austin says record amount of territory, it sounds like Russia is unarguably winning. But also, to Lloyd Austin saying this, and I understand, having lived in America for 13 years, right, how American military people think about the military. And it's interesting to me how this idea of mobilization works in their minds, right? First of all, the US has a population of 400 million people or something like that. That is a lot of freaking people. We had 45 million people before Russia killed a good million of them, okay? A lot of them are abroad. A lot of them are women and children. A lot of them are disabled, and they were disabled before 2022 because they fought since 2014, or because they were born disabled, or because of whatever, right? We mobilized a ton of people in the beginning of the invasion because there were a lot of volunteers. But those volunteers, like Starsky just said, were basically the equivalent of Russian soldiers showing up in numbers with nothing. I've spoken to many foreigners who came here as volunteers, and they were happy when they would get an AK-47. They were not allowed to bring their own weapons, which they had a lot of really good Western weapons, but the Polish border just wouldn't let it through. So they couldn't bring their machine guns and automatic guns because, especially in America, people have that at home. People were fighting with their bare arms. So a lot of those really good, brave soldiers with high morale and very high values died in the first year of the invasion because we didn't get Western help. And whatever help was being announced was being delayed by a year or two. There is help today that arrives to Ukraine that was announced in 2022. There is help today that was announced in 2022 that still hasn't arrived. So sure, we now have an adequate amount of artillery shells, and we don't have an adequate amount of men. It's not because we're not mobilizing enough men. It's because a lot of men died due to Western hesitation. And the problem with mobilizing more men right now is that basically we have a choice to make between mobilizing literally people of retirement age and 18 to 20-year-olds that don't have children yet. We are already entering a demographic crisis, and if the war doesn't kill this country, then the fact that people are dying out and not rebirthing enough is. So we can't do that. We're not the United States, and people here are not pawns. People are not pawns on a chessboard that you can just use for war. Because for us, there are a lot more things to think about in a genocide than warfare, right? Because a genocide itself is not just Russia killing these people directly with shaheds like, 8th air alert today in Kyiv. It's also Russia killing these people because they're being mobilized. And we need to balance. And at this point, the issue is that we had enough men. We had no resources. And now we have enough resources, but we don't have enough men. But that's a problem that West created directly on their own because of hesitation. And now we
I
are being reprimanded for something that isn't our fault. We just don't have enough freaking men. Unless we're willing to kill ourselves, we don't have enough men.
And speaking of the supplies, actually, it's very, very big exaggeration to say that we have like enormous amounts of supplies, because again, those promised packages that were promised in like 2022, some of them will, by the way, arrive next year only. And we are talking about necessary things like air defense. There were 6 or 7 air defense systems promised by the United States that never arrived to Ukraine. We are talking about only 10% of the military aid package that was approved by the American Congress this year. Only 1/10 of that is currently in Ukraine. Therefore, that is the biggest problem that we're facing nowadays. For some unknown reason that I cannot explain, all this is being delayed, and everybody talks about it until the day of the American elections. I'm sure that Americans are very, very much busy with their elections right now, but Ukrainians are busy fighting the war for democracy and freedom in the heart of Europe. That is another thing.
Ukrainians are also busy dying, right? Like, I mean, I know that we say this so many times, but I feel like it's become so normalized. Like, I tweeted today saying that, there was a Shahed drone passing by that window, literally that one, and then I heard it being taken down. I'm on the 15th floor. It's pretty high up, but for how high Shahed drones fly, this is very low. The fact that I saw a drone out of my freaking window in close proximity and I heard it as if it was in my apartment, for those who don't know what it sounds like a motorcycle times 20, is insane. And it's a Saturday morning in a European capital. And whether you consider Ukraine the EU or not, it is the center of geographical Europe, okay? So it's literally in the very center of geographical Europe. There are 45 Shahed drones, I think it was today, as of right now, just in Kyiv. And it's not normal. It's not okay. Like when people say that, like we're too busy to think about Ukraine because, I don't know, we have our own problems. It's like, well, I wish we had your problems. I wish our only problems were sort of like figuring out human rights, and which is big problems, but I wish they were figuring out human rights and figuring out our politicians, because this morning I was trying to figure out if my building was shaking because of the wind or if it was shaking because there were currently air defense systems taking down Shahed drones. And this is not even on approach to Kyiv. I live in central Kyiv. Like, it doesn't get more central than this. There is a Shahed drone flying out of my window, in front of my window. And the rest of Europe looks at it as business as usual because we're so used to this happening that it's no longer crazy. It's no longer something that people take as something unacceptable. It's acceptable. And that's the issue, that we as the Western world have made these circumstances acceptable, and it's a problem. And we shouldn't. And Russia wants Ukrainians to be mad at the West for looking at it as acceptable, and the West to be mad at Ukrainians for whining constantly. But like, the news coverage that you're seeing doesn't show you the reality of living here, because the news coverage that you're seeing makes it seem like we're whining because, I can go to a grocery store and buy brie cheese or something. But at the same time, I'm going to end up eating that brie cheese in the underground parking lot of my building because there is a Shahed drone outside of my window. I feel like, you win some, you lose some.
Yes, we have this big communication problem right now, which again Russia is trying to bring to its own benefit. We must understand that we need to solve problems through communication. Currently, our allies in Europe and United States specifically, they have a lot of their own problems. They have problems of like Haitian migrants eating pets and stuff like that. Southern border, of course, it's an extremely huge problem because there's so many American soldiers died in the artillery strikes on the southern border, throughout these years. It's insane. Those like garbage islands, floating like somewhere, etc., etc. Those problems are they require like a solution like extremely, extremely fast. Otherwise, the United States will probably, I don't know, collapse or something. But at the same time, I just wanted to remind our viewers that what was the biggest problem for the United States in like 1992. In 1992, the biggest problem for the United States was the fact that Ukraine had world's third biggest nuclear arsenal. And actually, Americans were like extremely terrified with the fact that this wild country like Ukraine, like where the hell is that, had like third nuclear arsenal of the world, able to
country with a third largest nuclear arsenal is about what we were seen as.
Yeah, it was insane. And even though there are people who don't really understand the facts, they say like there's this myth that even though Ukraine had all those nukes, they could not use them because they were only controlled from Moscow. But at the same time, if you already have that in your hands, you can basically do something with that. There are thousands.
Also create control centers. Like control centers are the least of your problems, especially in 30 years' time. We would have been one of the largest nuclear powers available.
Absolutely. And also there were thousands of tactical nukes that didn't require any freaking drones. You just load them in a howitzer in like D30 and shoot it like 18 kilometers away. As easy as that. So that was the biggest problem for the United States that unfortunately a lot of people forgot today. And there was case when President Biden was also like talking to the Congress, convincing that we need to disarm Ukraine because it's a threat to the international community, etc., collective security, which they did, and we agreed to that because we considered ourselves free nation that would never wanted to be enemies with our Western allies. We already back then in the early 90s, we saw our future by integrating with Europe and everything else. And there was this funny document called Budapest Memorandum that would guarantee Ukraine security. Basically, Russia guaranteed that Ukraine will never be attacked. And, today when I see for example, speeches in the United States by their presidential candidates saying that, if I was a president, we would never be involved in Ukraine, as if they are, And basically what he says is like, if I was a president, we would never need to help that Ukraine because we could literally spit on that Budapest Memorandum like Russia did, which I believe is a very, very dangerous signal. Therefore, that is something I would really want to talk about because to me, as a Ukrainian, as somebody who is proud that we gave up world's third nuclear arsenal to be able to be friends with everybody else and partners, and now we are being punished for that. That is something that we should remember and we should talk about. People often forget, things that make them feel inconvenient, but to Ukrainians currently it's a matter of life and death.
It is a matter of life and death. And also, yeah, I know, people get so annoyed about us constantly bringing up the Budapest Memorandum, but it is a big deal. Also, a lot of politicians worldwide say that it's a lot of politicians worldwide say that it was not a security guarantee, it was a security assurance. Well, the interesting thing is that actually in Russian language, which was at that time the language of the like speaking in Kyiv, right? Because of the Soviet Union, it was written as guarantees, and it was specifically mistranslated in English in order for the West to not be tied to actually going through with it. So Ukrainians, when we were signing this agreement, to us, it was translated on purpose as guarantees, not assurances. But the real document is the document in English, yet we signed the one in Russian. And trust me, a third largest nuclear power in the world wouldn't give up their fucking nukes for security assurances. Like, it's a joke. You know, it doesn't matter how much you're assuring us, it just wouldn't happen. So we are now in this very disadvantaged position, and we are, fighting out of our skin basically to try and keep not only ourselves safe but really the world, because Russia is a huge problem, and Ukraine has never been a rogue state doing anything wrong in the world. In fact, we've only helped, right? Like we did Georgia in 2008 when Russia invaded them. I actually I really appreciate talking to some foreigners that recently moved to Kyiv, because I feel like they ask questions and see things that I no longer notice. Like, for instance, I was asked the other day why Georgians love Ukrainians so much and why do we have so many Georgian restaurants? And I was like, oh, because in 2008, our president jumped on the plane the second that it happened and brought all the supplies that we could, right? Yushchenko did that. And so Georgians and Ukrainians have a pretty tight bond. Also, speaking of Georgia, one of the other issues that we have is a representation and communication, as you said, right? So the other day, Viktor Orban, which is part of the European Union, went to Georgia to congratulate Georgian Dream Party, which I would rename to Russian Dream Party, because it is literally, it's not even a party that's friendly to Russia. It's like Russian shills in the Georgian government. And they won the election. Obviously, the election is rigged. Georgian people are not happy about it. Orban goes and talks about how he is so supportive of this party and congratulates them and does all of these speeches and basically does Putin's bidding in Georgia, right? Then the head of the EU comes out and says, well, his statements do not represent the collective, or he doesn't represent on this trip the opinion of the European Union. Oh, but he does. Oh, he very much does. Just because you say that he doesn't represent it doesn't mean that he doesn't, because what he does represent is that in the EU, you can be a treasoner and you can be openly pro-Russian and openly support a state that's considered to be the enemy, because it is, Europe is under threat from Russia. And that's not like I'm just saying it. Like, it is a valid statement that's been indoctrinated, right? So Russia is the main enemy. This guy is very obviously pro-Russian. He's a head of an European state. He goes to Georgia and he supports Russia, and he talks constantly about forming more connections with Russia, and he constantly blackmails the European Union with like help to Ukraine or whatever to get money and to keep having relationships with Russia. So what he does represent from the EU when he goes there and does this is that being a treasoner and committing high level of treason in the European Union is unpunishable. And he continuously keeps representing that. And now we also have Fico in Slovakia, who's kind of like, trailing behind. And he talks about Georgia's European future and how, Georgia's dream chose not to participate in Ukraine's senseless war, calling it a senseless war as if we have nothing to fight for. And Georgia is not going to enter the European Union in the state in which it is right now with the Georgian Dream Party, no matter how much Viktor Orban dreams about it. But if it does, then that is going to further show and signal how dysfunctional the European Union is. Because at this point, it's not about the procedure of eliminating someone from the European Union. It's like the EU is a country in itself, even though it isn't. But it's kind of like the United States. Every state has its own sort of government, right? But they're all under the federal government, which in this case is the European Union. Treason in the United States would result in the ousting, right? Under normal circumstances. Right now we have MAGA and some crazy world dynamics. Treason in any country would result in ousting of the person who's committing that treason against their own nation. In this case, Viktor Orban is committing treason because he's in bed with the enemy. So there shouldn't be a procedure for expulsion. It should automatically, Hungary should be blocked out of all of the secret communication of the EU, of absolutely all of the summits, of the veto right. It's not even a special procedure that needs to exist. It's just common sense. And it's special circumstance. And speaking of private information, we also have a lot of issues with trust now with Western allies, because according to Zelensky in this massive press conference that he had in with Korea, and he said that obviously we're not getting all the weapons that are being announced. It's sort of like the announcements happen, the weapons never get here, right? But also another thing that does happen is that all of the secret information that's being passed onto the Western capitals is being leaked to the press, and Russia sees it. So that's another issue. If we can't communicate with our Western allies without the fear of it leaking tomorrow into the New York Times or The Guardian or Politico or wherever, how are we supposed to fight this war?
Absolutely, I agree on that. And it's not the first case. We all remember that young American National Guardsman who leaked secret documents to his favorite Discord group as if it was, my God, it was so cringy. Jesus. But speaking of...
He wanted to prove his masculinity by having this info.
He wanted to prove that he's the man by, exposing, revealing the top secret documents regarding not only Ukrainian security, but also American security as well. Russia is uploading so much to those people. I can tell you that. Unfortunately, a lot of people still don't consider Russia its existential threat in the United States for reasons I cannot explain again, because Russians are talking constantly about the United States as their main adversary since, since like 20s of last century. But anyways, when we talk about Orban, who visited Georgia, which is not recognized a terrorist country, what can we say about Antonio Guterres visiting Russia, which is recognized as a terrorist regime? And he didn't go to Rio de Janeiro. He went directly to Kazan, to the terrorist Russian Federation. He met with internationally wanted war criminal Putin, as if, United Nations don't recognize the authority of the International Crime Court.
Interestingly, the US used to say we do not negotiate with terrorists. Sure you don't. You have brunch with them. Genuinely, I'm sorry that I interrupted you, but this whole thing is like, we were just talking about this in the morning with Kalen. Maybe you have already met him, maybe not yet. He's right. You have. You guys are always right. So we were talking about this with Kalen, and he's a pretty good wordsmith when he doesn't want to be. And so this quote, "brunch with terrorists," I'm stealing from him because we were having a conversation about it, and he's like, I don't understand how the International Criminal Court is after this man, right? The UN should be in communication with the International Criminal Court, because these are two world order organizations that are supposed to impose world order, that are supposed to make sure that that it happens. And they declined the invitation to participate in the peace summit for Ukraine, and then they go and meet Putin for brunch. And it's not like, they're trying to position it as if like this negotiating sort of conversation where they're just going to see what's going on and how to like approach him and stuff. Okay, we shouldn't be approaching him, but if you already decided to do so, why are you doing all of these hugs and curtsies and, handshakes and all this stuff? Like, you're supposed to be stone cold, because you're showing this guy that it's okay. You have no problem with him. You're meeting with him. You're having a swell time. You're having food, lunch, and pâtés and stuff. It's like, it's not okay. It's not okay.
I agree. The International Criminal Court actually does cooperate with the United Nations through different committees, and basically United Nations as a world order organization does contribute, into establishing the world order, but obviously in not a proper way, from what we can see, speaking about Antonio Guterres. Why does it happen? We don't know. We know that Russia is an extremely rich country that can invest, those oil money into different affairs. Who knows? Maybe that's the case. So one thing we should also talk about is economical isolation of Russia, because again, we can see that Russia is extremely powerful in terms of communications, in terms of hybrid warfare, informational warfare, brainwashing people, making them think that they are actually their good friends that are being, defamed and blamed for things they don't do. Actually, Russia is like a peaceful nation, and all those people who stand against Russia in the civilized world, they actually don't support freedom of speech because they don't let Russians speak. At the same time, people always forget that there is no freedom of speech in Russia whatsoever, and you can be literally arrested for like a decade, literally for standing outside with an empty banner. One thing we should remember about this is that there is comparably cheap way to make Russia succumb. And it's an economical isolation, economical warfare, because Russia is coping and coping really, really hard with all their military expenses and things like that. Their industry is on the brink of collapse, basically, and they cannot do anything to make it work. They don't have enough vehicles. They don't have enough people to produce those vehicles. But there is a very, very cheap way to make them collapse is through economy, through complete economical isolation.
You know what's also interesting? There are going to be people who are going to say that Russians are so destitute that until like the poorest of the poor Russians, which is the majority of Russia, feel these sanctions and feel this economic collapse, a lot of years are going to pass. But that's actually not true, because here's the reason. Like the reason why these Russian people that live in like these villages without roads and electricity and stuff, how they survive and how they absolutely have no idea what's going on in the outside world is vodka. And and I mean this, it sounds so funny, but I mean this so genuinely. If you stop exporting alcohol to Russia and you stop exporting rubbing alcohol to Russia, which is something you can make moonshine out of, and you probably stop exporting like various black tea that you could make chifir out of, which is also alcohol. Basically, if you cut Russia's ability to drink itself to the oblivion, the people are actually going to start doing something, because genuinely those people in the villages, that's how they survive. They survive because they drink themselves to the oblivion. If they can't drink themselves to the oblivion, they don't have vodka, they don't have cheap rubbing alcohol, they don't have anything. That's when they're going to feel it.
I agree on that, absolutely. Russia is, according to statistics, Russia is among leading countries with the problem of alcoholism. Basically, people living outside Moscow and St. Petersburg in rural areas, what they do in winter. In winter, they basically drink like several months because there's no work, and it's not a secret. Like everybody knows that, literally. But speaking of economic isolation, this is, I would say, one of the most effective ways to make Russia collapse, because Russia has annual GDP that is smaller than in Italy, even despite its enormous size, but its annual GDP is on the level of Italy, smaller than in Italy. We also don't know much because Russia is classifying its different economical reports. We can learn less and less about their true level of their import, about the level of their GDP in like 2024, because they're classifying more and more of those reports that could be otherwise obtained through websites, like freely, But that is one of the ways through increasing sanctions through increasing the financing of different security agencies and different establishments that exist nowadays in order to destroy Russian schemes, to evade sanctions and things like that, Russia will be left with like China, North Korea, and Iran as their closest ally. And people must understand that Russia still has to pay for the support provided by those countries. It's not like they get it for free. They still have to pay for it. Therefore, we should think about this as well. It's comparably easy, like nothing is easy, but it's much easier and much more effective than building tens or hundreds of military factories from scratch around Europe, in the United States as well, and hoping that our weapons race will bring us to the level when Russians will look at us and think, oh my God, let's better not invade European countries. Two things we should concentrate our attention at, especially this year and the next year, I believe, is economical isolation of Russia and with the end result looking as economical collapse of Russia, because this will remove the Russian threat like forever. If they don't have funds to fund their hybrid warfare, if they don't have funds to fund their propaganda and brainwashing on the West, basically they're absolutely harmless. And another thing is informational warfare. We need more establishments that will effectively fight Russian propaganda by exposing their lies, exposing fakes, and showing people how exactly it works. There's a lot of people nowadays, especially I see those commentaries on my channel, who say, well, Russian propaganda is nothing comparing to, the propaganda conducted by our national television. There is a small nuance. Your national television doesn't really want to see you dead because they need your money as a taxpayer. Like Russian propaganda pursues only one goal: is seeing you dead in the country that is drowned in internal conflicts, that is torn by two different parties. That is something that Russians want to see in the future, and they invest billions and billions dollars into this informational warfare ongoing on the territory of your country, be it United States, Germany, or France. That is what we can see, and this is something that we should deliver to those people, because people would rather believe, conspiracies about those, CNN ran by reptilians and George Soros, than facts about the actual Russian informational warfare that is waged on your territory.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna steal another phrase from Kalen here. His ears must be burning right now, but he said something that I like. I'm honestly stealing this as a phrase that I constantly want to keep repeating, is that people these days complain about the US being a superpower or an empire or having too much wage in the world, right? But at the same time, like, the US is supposed to not meddle in the foreign politics, but people want the US to save Gaza, right? The US is not supposed to meddle in the foreign politics, but people want the US to do this, this, and this right in other countries. So which one is it? Also, when you talk about superpowers, the world and every dynamic on the planet always has a leader. So there is always going to be a country that is a superpower. And as much as you might hate the US, you might not like that there are trans people because you're a bigot, or you might not like that there are immigrants' rights or whatever, or that there are people being treated fairly, or that women are having abortions despite the fact that you're a Christian and you believe in God. And they don't, but they, it's not none of their business what you believe in. The point is that no matter how many of these things you don't like, you can go outside of your house, literally, I don't know, in your underwear, take a poster and say, I fucking hate this government for letting women have abortions. I hate this government for, I don't know, allowing trans people to exist. And you can go and criticize your government. You can call them every curse word under the sun. And nothing is going to happen to you because you're entitled to being able to criticize your government. You are entitled to fair and free elections. You are entitled to things. And at the end of the day, you don't like this government, you elect another one in 4 years, right? Maybe you don't like that one either. Maybe no one good is running, but the point is you have choices. And you can still express your disgruntlement with these choices or with what they're doing. If a superpower in the world is going to be something like Russia, where you don't have that ability, you don't have the ability to criticize the government, you don't have the ability to decide where your money goes unless you're an oligarch, you don't have the ability to do anything, you have no control over yourself, your body, your actions, because you have to do whatever won't piss off the government enough to arrest you and take away your freedom, which you already don't have because you're restricted. You only have freedom as long as you submit, right? That's not freedom. If someone like Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China, which are all 4 countries that have the same type of situation going on, are the world superpower, and you think naively that you're going to be sitting in the US and Europe and experiencing the same rights you've had before, you're mistaken. Because they're now going to be the superpower, and that's going to be affecting your life because they are going to be meddling in foreign affairs, and they're going to be coming in to different countries to figure out what's happening there, and they're going to be coming into your country to figure out what's happening there. So yeah, the US might meddle in foreign affairs because the US is a superpower and everyone always wants the US weapons or help or I don't know, or geopolitical connections or something like that. But it's for a reason. It's because the US is strong and the US has pull worldwide. And it's better that the US does than Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran do.
I completely agree on that. As a Ukrainian, we always saw United States as a brand. United States that taught us about being more open, speaking more freely. The United States that brought us standards of like press, right? We have ethics that were literally brought from abroad, from the United Kingdom, from United States. That is something that was our example that we followed, right? We always looked up to United States in terms of freedom of speech. And here we have like a tiny example, okay? If you take a big banner saying, we must be friends with Russia, and you go outside in Washington and you stand near the White House showing that banner, apparently you will find a lot of supporters that will say, yeah, definitely we have to be friends with Russia, we should stop fighting, etc., and solve global problems together. But if you take a banner saying we should be friends with the United States and go outside in Moscow and stand on the Red Square, how do you think what will happen to you over the next 30 minutes? So you will either get arrested or accused of being an American spy, or in the worst case, some, let's say, veteran of the terrorist army that lost his eye or balls or like leg in Ukraine will kick your ass for that because they will say, are you fucking nuts? They are our sworn enemies and we should utilize everything we have to destroy United States. That is one of the reasons why you see a lot of jerks nowadays in Twitter, for example, saying that Russia is not your enemy. You gotta comply. You gotta, raise your hands, hug them, and basically receive a backstab. Which, by the way, I'm not even talking about all the agreements Russia violated since the beginning of this useless...
Since the dawn of times.
Since the dawn of times, yeah. Don't remember who said that. Literally, the agreement with Russia is not worth even the paper where it's written on.
Oh yeah, I think my toilet paper, my bath tissue is a lot more useful than
apparently. Apparently. But speaking of Kaylan, by the way, I would also like to call our viewers to check out his channel and check out his recent report from Kherson, where a lot of Russian atrocities take place even today because Russians hunt civilians on the streets using FPV drones and using drones dropping charges. There were several reports only last week One of them was about a man who was wounded by a Russian drone, a civilian man on a street. And when the medics were called and the ambulance arrived, Russians dropped another charge, killing one medic and wounding two others. It was in Kindyka, actually, in town of Kindyka, Antonievsky district. And there was another case just a couple of days ago when a 27-year-old man was attacked in his own car. He received injuries. There was another report coming today, actually, in the morning, about a similar case. Russians attacking civilians. They have something that they call human safari. And actually, they brag about it in the social media. They post all those terrorist attacks on civilians in the Telegram channels. They are widely available out there. You can find them on YouTube as well. You can just search. So Kellen Robertson went to Kherson. He made a report from Kherson. He was attacked by the Russian drones himself, and he can talk a lot about the situation there. Why it's important to talk about is because Kherson doesn't receive enough coverage in the media nowadays, as if nothing happens there. And unfortunately, we can read more news about people being robbed on the streets somewhere in like Detroit than we can see reports coming from areas where Russian war criminals attack Ukrainian people. We must talk about it. Why it's important, all the viewers that are watching this video right now, they can contribute to this by sharing this content so more people would see that. That is something Russians utilize by creating fake people on Twitter and pushing their narratives, their fakes. We have legit information and we have live people that can actually contribute to delivering these messages and the truth to the international society. So guys, if you're watching this, please check out that report. Yulia, I will be grateful if you could include it in the description of this video. And guys, please share it as much as you can, because this is something really, really important.
It is, and also like I think that people don't, I say it in the beginning and the end of every video, right? And it's sort of like, please do share and like it and comment on it, and I mean it really, because it does change it so much. It changes the dynamic of how the video is being shown to people so much. And also, like, you never know, you can just send it to like random people that you follow on whichever social media, and one of them might want to watch it and you don't even know it, and that's going to make a huge difference, because that person can do the same thing, and then this video suddenly, instead of, I don't know, 1,000 views, has 200,000 views. And it's, in this case, the views are not like, it's not like we're showing you a lipstick shade here, right? It's not like the views are here because we make money off of them or because we want the validation. We need the views because we need the world to continue understanding that I, for instance, right now am sitting in the capital of Ukraine, in very center, under an air raid. You don't hear it because obviously it goes off for like a minute and a half, and then you just sit there and monitor updates. And there have been, I think, 9 air raids since I woke up at 7 in the morning. It is currently 2 p.m. and I don't even know how many since midnight. And before we were recording this today, I told Starsky that we might need to cut it short because there was a Shahed drone in that window. It's not normal, but we are not talking about it the way that it is because I think we Ukrainians are used to it because we live in it every day, so it doesn't shock us anymore. But it doesn't shock you anymore. And that's the issue, because you don't live in it, and it should shock you because you're not traumatized by it. Like, we are not okay. Like, we as a nation are not okay. We think it's fine. We think Shahed drones flying next to our window is fine because we're used to it. But the rest of the world shouldn't. It's kind of like looking at a traumatized person who's gone through severe PTSD and thinking that being abused is fine. It's not fine.
I completely agree with you, Yulia, and one of the reasons why we still have at least some kind of coverage about Ukraine is basically to all the decent people who share this content. But whenever I hear this question, what can I do specifically to help right? Sitting here in my home I don't know, in Texas or in Alaska or whatever, what can I do? That is one thing you can do. You can help Ukrainians be heard in the media. Why there is no coverage in the mainstream media about Ukraine anymore? It's literally because they don't see much interest in the public. They are not only opinion makers, they are also somebody who reacts to the opinion of the public, and they will be delivering more information on a demand. When they see that the demand for this content is high among the society, they will be delivering more content to fulfill this demand. That is one of the reasons, and you can literally help Ukrainian voices be heard, and we can talk more about it, and it will change the world. This is something that you can help us, even if you don't go outside, even if you don't, if you cannot do much otherwise. Helping Ukrainians informationally can help and can make the difference. Russians invest billions of dollars every single year into informational warfare. That's why we can see a lot of Russian opinion makers, and we can see that the opinion about the Russian invasion of Ukraine shifts over time. We don't have those resources. Nobody does. And unfortunately, the unqualified leaders out there, ruling different countries, who don't realize the danger of the situation, they are not as dedicated to survive and to win this war against Russian terrorism as Russian terrorists who want to see the demise of their countries. Therefore, we can make this difference by sharing the Ukrainian content and by spreading the Ukrainian message. That is something everybody can do. And, because Russians cannot create more fake people than there are people out there, I believe that we can prevail, and we can definitely win over all kinds of Russian efforts.
Exactly. I think that for sure. And I think one of the biggest things, and we say this so much, it's become kind of like a cheesy statement, but unity. Everything we've talked about today is about unity, right? Like the US criticizing Ukraine instead of admitting their own mistakes and realizing this war is not the same war that would be fought in the US ever, or with the same resources. That's not unity, right? Like Europe not reacting to Orban and his statements and not actually punishing Hungary for what it's doing is not unity. People thinking that Ukrainians are whining about war is not unity. We need unity, and unity is what we're lacking. One thing Russia has is unity. They're not divided on anything. They're happy to be poor, destitute, and drunk.
Speaking of unity, this is something I also agree on. This is something that we crucially need nowadays. Also, we need unity in communication with our partners, because Ukraine has a lot of prominent diplomats, and I believe that we can show more effort into properly communicating with our partners. We can convince the world that Russian aggression is a threat to them, is an existential threat, because Russia is acting according to the military plan, executing combat psychological operations in your countries as well that are prepared by the military, Russian personnel. And we can raise awareness. I'm sure that the war is not lost, no matter what kind of picture Russia is preparing out there in the media, but there are facts, and we base our opinion on facts only. We must remember, only facts will save us from the collapse. So, guys, we need to stay united nowadays. That is the main message. And even when we talk about, for example, the situation in the United States, there are like 50-50, right? There are like 50% of people ready to freaking murder other 50% of people. We need to find ways to communicate because one way or another, United States is not Russia. Ukraine is not Russia. Europe is not Russia. We have our own vision, and we are united by our values that Russians despise so much. Therefore, we should stay united and strong. I'm sure that everything will be fine. Or not. Then everything will be really, really bad.
I think the message is united 24/7, which is quite quite on the nose here with one of the most popular platforms in this country. But that's the reason why it's called that way, because we got to be united 24/7 against Russia's evil. It's not even, I think what I'm going to say to conclude this, it's not about Ukraine's victory, it's about Russia's loss. For the world, it's really about Russia's loss.
And it's possible to achieve. It's possible to achieve through comparably cheaper methods, and we can do that. We only need to be dedicated. That's all.
Well, as I always say, we aim to put fires out, but we usually end up setting things on fire. But it's a good fire because it gets your gears turning, and the gears of your neighbor, and maybe of your MAGA supporting grandma. So if this conversation inspired you, or you liked it, or it did something and made you jitter, don't forget to follow this channel. And of course, don't forget to like this video and send it to your MAGA supporting grandma. I'm kidding, but do send it around because that makes it easier for us to share this information and for it to land on less deaf ears. And of course, do comment your questions, suggestions, and opinions because I read all of them and I'm always so happy to absorb them. So see you next time.